Welcome to the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery at the Whisky Show. Throughout the week, we'll have sessions, live chats and videos showing on our booth. For your chance to win a set of all our whiskies to date, follow the link to sign up to our newsletter. The winner of this free prize draw will be announced on Friday 9th of October at 7:30pm. We'll always be live at 2pm, 4pm and 7pm, with special sessions throughout the week. Key dates for your diary are Friday the 2nd at 6:30pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Saturday the 3rd at 4pm, we'll be in conversation with the Swedish Whisky Girl. Saturday the 3rd at 7pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Sunday the 4th at 4pm, we'll be talking all things malt with Malting CEO Tim and his team. Sunday 4th at 7pm, live tasting session with David and Joe. Friday the 9th of October at 5pm, discussing barrel-aged beer with Alex from Top Brewery. And finally, Friday 9th of October at 7pm, rounding up and picking the winner of our free prize draw. And you can always ask us questions using the chat function. These films were part of our Field to Bottle Facebook Live series that we ran every Wednesday for 12 weeks over lockdown. They covered every aspect of our production, from field to bottle, each lasting around 30 minutes.
My grandfather bought the farm at the end of the Second World War and farmed it until the late 50s. My dad took over from him, farmed it till the mid-80s, and I really have taken it over from that point. It's a traditional Yorkshire arable farm, high on the Yorkshire Wolds, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we were not making very much money from doing our traditional growing of oilseed rape wheat and barley. So we had, like everybody else in the country, to start to look to move the business in a different direction. I looked at the resources that we had on the farm at that particular point, and the two main ones that struck me were the fact that we had our own water supply, and the other thing is that we grow a lot of malting barley. So I put the two and two together and came up with the idea of brewing, and did some research into that, and decided that that would be a way forward for us on our particular farm. So in 2003, we set up the Top Brewery, and that's continued to grow over the last 15, 16 years. In 2011 and 12, it seemed like a logical progression that we could make a whisky, because the first part of the brewing process and the first part of the whisky making process are identical. Having explored that, it then needed putting into practice, and if I'd not gone and done that, then I'd have gone to my grave regretting it.
Tom and I have been friends for many years. We've played rugby together, we've seen our families grow up together. So Tom approached me with an idea of making Yorkshire's first single malt whisky. I thought it was a fantastic idea and couldn't wait to get involved with him. So we looked into the production of whisky around the country, and it was evidence that it had never been made in Yorkshire before, which is very unusual, as we have some of the best malting barley growing land in the area. And it just made absolute sense to use the resources local to us to produce something completely unique. The next step for us really was to develop a brand behind the story, and as we are based only 10 minutes down the road from the biggest gannet colony in the UK, we felt we wanted to use the gannet as our mascot, as it represents a lot that we're doing at the business. It's very tenacious, it's very graceful, and it's full of spirit. So we felt that represented us very well.
The Yorkshire Wolds is a great area for growing malting barley. It's got thin calcareous soils, which barley likes. Barley does not like big, heavy land. We also have a fantastic water supply as well, which comes from the chalk aquifers under the farm. The farm doesn't actually have mains water, And the one thing about this water is that it's very, very consistent, which is one of the reasons why we think our beer has been so consistent over the last 18 years.
So the first part of making a whisky is actually making something that resembles beer, which is called wash. We do that by using the barley from the farm and sending it down to Munton's malting factory at Bridlington. That comes back to us as a malted barley, and we then steep that barley in hot water and make a very sticky, sugary solution. From that, we add the yeast and we start to produce alcohol. Once we've got this sugary solution and it's turned into alcohol, we end up with an 8% alcohol wash. This is the product we put into the copper stills, and this is the stuff that we start to make the whisky from.
Well, we're incredibly proud that we are a fully fledged field-to-bottle distillery. We've got absolutely everything that we need here on the Yorkshire Wolds for making an excellent whisky. One of the things that's really important to us is knowing exactly that it's our barley that goes into our bottle. What that also does is it gives us a degree of consistency that a lot of small brewers and distillers wouldn't have, because our malt is effectively one big batch.
There's only a handful of distilleries around the world that could claim to be fully field-to-bottle producers. That gives us great traceability. You can rewind that liquid back into a field, which I find very fascinating and a great story.
The sustainability of the farm is really important to us, and that's what underpins everything that we do. It was the reason why we started brewing in the first place, was to make sure that the farm could continue and could be a legacy for the future. One of the things we're trialling this year is direct drilling, which means basically you don't disturb the soil when you plant the next crop. The current thinking, and it's been shown by various different research bodies, that by ploughing the land, we are releasing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, which doesn't really need to be released. Our responsibilities as a land user are to make sure that we don't take too much out of the soil or the land and leave not enough for the future. So it's trying to really safeguard future years with the best current thinking.
You don't get many chances to produce something that's completely unique, and whisky in Yorkshire is one of them. You only get the chance to release first Yorkshire whisky once, and we felt, Tom and I together, wanted that opportunity to do something completely different. So we chose the name Filey Bay for our first single malt whisky, as we can see Filey Bay from our distillery. It made absolute sense to use the area, as we love the coast, we love the sea, it's ever changing, and Filey Bay represents everything we are at this distillery. The next step for us really was to develop a brand, and what we didn't want to do was just copy somebody else's idea of what whisky should be. So we developed a brand which stood out, which was different, which was fresh. Again, using all the assets of the area and everything that we felt was good about the area. And we hope we've put that into the bottle, we've put that into the label, and everybody involved in the business has put everything into what we've produced. So we feel that we've produced a brand that is completely different and unique. First and foremost, we set up the Spirit of Yorkshire to make the best possible whisky we could. But then, of course, we needed to share that. So to do that, we set up the visitor centre and the coffee shop. That is very important to us, that it's not just about the production, but it's also about the people. So thank you for coming to the Spirit of Yorkshire and sharing our journey. I hope you enjoy the rest of your tour and take away a part of Yorkshire which is completely unique.
Okay, well, I think we've got a few more people joined on now, so we'll stop talking about future releases and go about past ones.
We're back in time.
Yeah, go back in time. So, hello everybody, and welcome to Field to Bottle number 3. So this is our third Facebook Live that we're doing here remotely from the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. So we've got Joe at his house. I'm Jenny. I'm up here at the farm. In fact, I can do some of these fancy bits and bobs. So we've got Joe Clark, who's our whisky director, and this week I've spelt his name right, so that's nice.
Thank you. I mean, we've only been working together for 3 years, Jen, you know. So.
And the rest, yeah. So that's a good learning. Good to know that I can spell properly now. And then I'm Jenny, and I head up the marketing here at Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. So our Facebook Lives each Wednesday are called Field to Bottle, and they're because we're discussing a different aspect of our production process. So whether that's from the field to the bottle, and we're sort of jumping between a bottle week and a field, as it were, week. So the first week we did it was 2 weeks ago, and we talked about Distillery Project 001 and 002. Last week we were talking all about the farm. And this week for number 3, we're talking about Distillery Projects 003 and 004. So those are sat nicely in front of Joe just there, but I'll hand back over to Joe now to talk a bit more about what Distillery Projects actually are, and give a bit of background into what we're talking about today.
Thanks very much, Jen. So so we're revisiting some old bottlings that we did very early on in the distillery's lifetime. So yeah, what we're actually tasting here, you know, sadly, if you've just come across us and you're just listening, you can't actually buy these. They're long gone. They're kind of part of our archive now, and kind of what bottles do remain of these, largely squirreled away in collections by, kind of fans and followers. So the Distillery Project series was a kind of a set of young bottlings that we did that we called Maturing Malt, and they kind of showcase different kind of flavor profiles, different cask types in our warehouse, and really kind of followed our spirit from very early on, really through to the back end of last year when we launched our first whiskey. So they're kind of like pre-whiskey bottlings, and we did them in very, very small runs. So there was just 2,000 of each of these, and same with 1 and 2. And yeah, we never pushed them far and wide. At the moment, if you're looking for a bottle of Filey Bay, you can pick it up from numerous retailers and whiskey specialists. But for these, we just sold them at the distillery, so they were really just available for anybody who came to see us. They were really bought. I explained a little bit about this on the first video we did, but it's worth just recapping. We never really intended to do these. We're a bit different to other distilleries in that we've never done white spirits. So we don't make gin, we don't make vodka, we don't make liqueurs and that kind of thing. So when we opened to the public Easter 2017, it was really a little bit tricky. We were like, well, what are people going to taste when they come around the distillery? And we were pretty brave. We stuck our necks out and we put out 1-year-old cask samples at the end of the tour, and it became very apparent quite quickly that actually people were tasting kind of 1.5-year-old kind of pre-whiskey that we'd made, and they were really enjoying it, and they wanted to buy it and take it home with them. So we kind of cracked on, and we put spirit in a bottle much earlier than we ever intended, and we were always kind of really blown away always by the response on them, and especially the response that this one got, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So they were kind of early bottlings for the distillery. They're a little snapshot into our warehouse at the time. So we bottled this one in it was in this kind of leading into the summer of 2018, so we had this just in time for our open day that year, and then this one followed into the winter, and yeah, as I said, they've all gone. They are no more. So if you've got a bottle at home and you happen to have one open, or you feel like opening a bottle that you've got, now's the time. Good.
Yeah, so again, just to quick recap, because I think we've had a few more people just jump on since Joe's been speaking, but Distillery Projects in a nutshell was is our exploration range. So thus far it's all been about maturing malts, so exploring what our spirit can be in terms of the whiskey itself. That was crucial when we were in that tricky 3-year period for a new distillery before you can call it whiskey, when you've been distilling and you've laid cask down and you've put all that expense behind everything, but you still can't sell anything under the whiskey mantle. So that's why we chose the wordings maturing malts. So previously we spoke about 001 and 002, which were the first 2 releases. Now we're going to talk about 003 and 004. So as Joe said, 003 was from summer 2018, 004 was from about November 2018, so it was around just in time for Christmas. Both of them had not dissimilar cask inputs, but really quite different tastes, and actually 003 has my favourite ever tasting note on it, which made me smile when Joe gave me it to go onto the labels, which was soft, creamy and sweet with milk chocolate, stone fruits, banana splits, pink wafer biscuits, and orange zest. I really like the idea of pink wafer biscuits, which kind of give me endless memories of being in Burton Fleming Village Hall when I was a kid.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the absolutely amazing things about whiskey, and the fact that it is so evocative, and it will very quickly, if you allow it and if you spend the time with it, it will throw you back to your childhood quite quickly, especially when you've got something like this, which is really, you know, really kind of creamy, very fruity, and it's sweet, and it does have that kind of, for me, it's got a kind of sweet shop element to it as well. So yeah, it kind of takes you back, which is nice, you know. Nothing better than the sense of smell to trigger old memory. It's actually better than sight and sound. So yeah, it does. It kind of really can take you back. So that's nice. So that takes you back to when was it?
Well, Burton Fleming, and actually, to be honest, Hummonby, Village Halls, and kind of endless, I don't know, ballet shows, parties, all of these things.
Don't sound like great memories to me, but they're obviously nice to you.
A significant time ago. We won't talk about that. So, do you want to just talk to us a bit more about the casks that went into 00?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah. So these just 2,000 bottles. So they were a combination of casks. So you know, small batch run. So each of 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this series, really a combination of 5, with the exception to 2. So this was 3 bourbon barrels and 1 STR wine cask, which we'll explain a little bit more about soon, and a Pedro Jimenez sherry hogshead. So this was the first kind of more outrightly sherry influenced of the series because of that, and that PX sherry hogshead, yeah, it did kind of great things to the spirit in there, even at such a young age. It brought loads and loads of colour, really super active cask, and as you might expect with that cask type, if you know much about it, it does bring stacks of fruit, and it brings lovely kind of rich notes. It does bring, it can bring quite a profound kind of chocolatey note and a dried fruit kind of sweet spiciness to it. So that was the makeup: 3 bourbon, 1 wine, which was the STR cask, and then the PX sherry hogshead. And yeah, as I say, it was the more sherry led of the range. So yeah, the other thing to consider with these, as well as them being a combination of casks, is they're also a combination of our 2 distillate styles, which I didn't really talk about in the last video we did, because, you know, it can get a little bit complicated. But you know, not only are we unusual in the fact that we're a field to bottle distillery, and that we're, you know, we don't make kind of gin and white spirits and whatnot, but we do have 2 very distinctly styles of new make spirit. And when we talk about new make spirit, that's the spirit that we're making kind of week in, week out. Even now in this lockdown period, still flowing. And yeah, you know, we have our kind of more traditional style, if you like, which just runs through our pot stills, and then we have a slightly, arguably more innovative style for the industry, which is kind of run through a 4-plate rectifying column on the spirit still. I don't want to get too nerdy on it. I don't want to go too.
No, that's one for another field to bottle, but it is useful to point it out.
Yeah, sure. And you know, so when we're in production at the distillery, you know, for a period of time in the year, we're moving through the pot styles and then it's the column styles, and it can fluctuate and vary a little bit, but we tend to do about 50-50 of the 2 spirit styles throughout the year. And so this was, yeah, a combination. Now 2 of the casks in here, the PX hogshead and 1 of the bourbon barrels, was from the column spirit, whereas the others were from the pot style spirit that we do. So it's not just the casks that were coming together. There's also the 2 distillate styles, and especially when the casks were this young, you know, the distillate style had a big say. You know, if you have the 2 new makes side by side, you know, the column stuff much cleaner, very light, against the pot stuff, which is a little bit heavier and it's a little bit fuller. And so when you have them in cask for a short period of time, the differences are quite pronounced. So bringing the 2 together in these, and with all of them, in fact, was really interesting, because not only are you thinking about the different casks and how they bring flavour, You're also thinking about the distillate styles and how they help to shape mouthfeel and kind of texture. Good. I'm rambling, aren't I? Am I?
No, well, a little bit, but that's okay.
Time.
So we've got a question that's come in already.
Okay.
So just to quickly say to anybody else who's listening, if you've got any questions, please just bob them into the comments section underneath, and then we'll pull them up onto the screen and we'll answer them as and when. So it might be in the moment, but it might be towards the end of the program. That sounds very intense, doesn't it? The Facebook Live, but that also sounds like a mouthful. I'm not quite sure what to call it. Anyway, we'll answer them at the end as well. So this question comes from Paul. So the STR is it possible to use any other wine cask as an STR?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the ones that we use have previously held Rioja. They are from Spain, but yeah, the process of making an STR cask, yeah, technically speaking, could be a wine cask from any other region. So for example, Avalon have used STRs in the past, which isn't surprising because we share a link with them through Dr. Jim Swan, who worked with very, very closely when the distillery was being set up. They're using actually US wine casks, or at least they were, and they may have used others as well. But I know from conversations that I've had with Ian that they were using US red wine, and I'm sure there are other distilleries using different wine casks of different origins that are being shaved, toasted, and recharred. But in the case of what we're using, it's Rioja. So Spain, yeah.
Super, thanks, Joe. So there's no other questions that have come in on 0 through 3. So I think what might be interesting is to talk about 004 now, and then we'll go back and have a kind of conversation about the two of them together.
Yeah, sure. So 04, yeah, obviously it followed. This was always intended, really. I think fair to say that to be a kind of a slight closing chapter to this series of 4 bottles. It was probably the hardest of them to put together because that was such a hard act to follow. I mean, I can remember when we did that on the open day. I remember we had loads of people out for that open day. It was really, really busy, really lovely day at the distillery, and there were so many people that absolutely loved it. I remember thinking, well, this is absolutely fantastic. Everyone's really enjoying this, and it's selling really quickly and everything. And then thinking, that's going to be a little bit tricky to follow. So this was a little bit harder in that respect. But yeah, with this, it's led. There's really very little to no sherry influence in this whatsoever. So it's about bourbon and it's about the wine casks. So again, it was 5 barrels. It was 3 bourbon and 2 of the STR wine casks. It did have a little touch of a sherry barrel as well in there. It was a sherry butt, so I used a bit of that just to help kind of tie it all together. So you had the 3 bourbon and in the combination there, 2 of the bourbon casks were column, and the 2 STR wine casks were pot, and the other bourbon cask in the mix there was pot as well. So again, it was similar kind of ratios to this in terms of pot to column, but obviously with having no PX or really any major sherry influence, it flavour-wise very, very different. And of course, all the time throughout these, the spirit's getting older. So in here, this was kind of tipping around kind of 2.5 years old when it went to bottle. Certainly the older stuff in there was, and yeah, it is. I can remember when we launched it, and I think most people when they were tasting them, especially side by side, it makes you work harder. So not only was it harder to put together, it makes you work harder from a tasting point of view. And the reason for that being is that it is deeper and it is more complex. So it will. I always mark, our casks and whiskey generally higher the more entertaining I find them, and this will keep you engaged, I would say, a little bit longer. This is really super lovely, fruity upfront stuff, but with that, it will, you can pour a glass of it, you can have a nose, have a sip, you can come back to it 10 minutes later, that glass will keep going and keep entertaining you. So yeah, it was arguably the more complex of the series, but that's not to say it was people's favorite either.
Yeah,
what
well,
do you think?
I really do like a 003. I have to say,
Yeah.
it just does. I just really like it. But
Crowd pleaser.
it doesn't now. There you go. It's very
Yeah.
nice. It's after 6. It's fine. But to be honest, at the moment, the Moscatel is winning it for me. I'm really enjoying a bit of an evening, which is lovely. And actually, a couple of the comments coming in. Someone talking about how STRs their favourites, and another comment from Paul saying, "Can't wait to see an STR single cask." And actually, that is what 006 was. Or was that, hang on, which way around was it? 5. I get it the wrong way around. 005 was a single cask SDR. And so we'll be talking about that probably in about 2 weeks' time. I think we've got that one scheduled in for. So those two were the final two of the maturing malts in this current vein, the pre-whiskey maturing malts. Did 2 single casks to finish on, which went really well. So firstly, if anyone's listening and got any more comments or questions, then please do bob them into the comments box. Now I think we'll just talk a bit more about the two bottlings themselves. And I think the really interesting thing about these ones was because we didn't have a gin, it was the way that we were able to draw people into the distillery in those first 3 years. And one of the really nice things was actually they then got picked up and kind of taken on. So interestingly, when we first started doing this, not very many people were talking about new make spirit and releasing their new make spirit as a thing. A couple of people had done them as special releases. So the Cotswolds had, I think someone in Australia, I think it was Starwood, but I'm not sure because the names all slightly changed from what the distillery was called to that. And now actually more's coming out. So I know in one of the tastings that you did the other day, didn't you, Joe? There was some new make spirit from one of the newer English distilleries as well. But for when we were doing this 3 years ago, when we first started it, very few people were releasing anything that wasn't either brand new make or wasn't single malt whiskey. There wasn't anything else in between. Mm-hmm. So one of the nice things, I'm rambling a little bit, is that we got picked up by Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible, and each of the distillery projects got reviewed in the Whiskey Bible 2020, which was great. And actually 003 knocked it out of the park, really, with a 95 out of 100 score and a quote, which, I mean, from a marketing perspective, I absolutely love, which he started it off with, which was just ridiculously beautiful, which just summed it up and was really nice. I love just a lovely quote that we could use across lots of different things. And it still makes me smile and feel very proud whenever I read the reviews now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. You don't really see or very. Certainly when we were doing these kind of young pre-whiskey bottlings, I think a lot of distilleries, I think fair to say some might be a bit nervous about doing it because you're giving people that insight into what's happening in your cask and your warehouse very, very early on, which traditionally in kind of single malt Scotch you just wouldn't do, you just wouldn't see that kind of approach. It's very much still considered, an unfinished product at that stage. And I think we were brave doing it. We wouldn't have done it if they weren't tasting good ultimately. But yeah, it was certainly out there. Interesting. If there's any young distilleries thinking about doing it, go for it. In my opinion, if you've got the cask and they're tasting good, it's a little bit tricky in terms of people getting their heads around them. But at the distillery, after someone had been around, seen the stills, and seen how we were making it, it kind of all made sense. Yeah.
Super. We've got some questions coming in, so we can move on to this. So one from Matt Hill. So is there any difference in ABV between the pot and the column stills, and do they mature differently?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, when we're running just the pots, and our middle cut will average out about 73. That's what we're looking for there. So when the spirit run starts, it's obviously it starts much stronger and it drops away throughout the distillation. So in our middle cut, which we cut really early on, and our middle cut is kind of short and arguably maybe shorter than a lot of other distilleries, depends what style of spirit you want to make. But yeah, it's looking at 73% on the pots, but when we're on the column, we're much higher. It's only a 4-plate column, so it isn't making We're not kind of driving the spirit up to really, really high strengths, like you might expect in kind of grain whiskey production or indeed white spirit production. But we will cut in the middle cut on the columns. 86 is typically where we'll be. So yeah, it's much stronger, but you're still retaining at that strength. You're still retaining a lot of the fruity character in the spirit. If you start driving up into the 90s, then you drive all your character. Well, the part of the character that's going to make your whiskey really fruity and interesting starts to kind of be stripped away. So, short answer, yes. Pot 73 in the middle cut, column 86 in the middle cut.
And did they mature differently? What's the impact that has on the cask?
Yeah, so in terms of development, we did notice, at least in theory, you'd find, all the column stuff, because you're stripping out more impurities in the distillate, that when you put that into barrel, it's almost a kind of cleaner slate, for the cask to put his footprint on. So, the column, certainly, like there was a sherry cask that we laid down the column style, like the PX one in there, which we laid down kind of early in production in 2016. They had quite a rapid maturation effect on them. The casks are very active, and we did keep them down in the still house for a bit where they're kind of hotter and drier. So yeah, I do see a difference. It's really interesting now as they're developing more. So as more of the two styles are coming of age, and you can kind of go like for like across a month of bourbon fillings. Yeah, you are seeing some differences. It's hard to say exactly if that difference is going to get bigger as they mature onwards, or whether that differences will narrow in a little bit. But certainly mouthfeel is very different. Yeah.
Okay, so both great, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Super. Okay, so
great question.
Another question here, which is about how you characterize each cask and whether you use any software. So Joe has an exceptionally spreadsheet that scares every time I see it. But other than that, Joe, how do you characterize each cask? I'm pretty. I guess I'm pretty old school. I guess it's fun. There it is. It's the book. So all the notes in, and that's what I take to the warehouse every time. And that's where the bulk of notes go. But yeah, when I'm working a kind of final cask selection, certainly putting batches together, you need to make sure that you're getting, you're recording that information, slightly more organized fashion than scribbles in a notebook. So yeah, I drop it down. But it's as simple as that, Jeff. It's really, I don't have a kind of sophisticated Distiller 3000 machine that you punch the information in and it does that work for you. It really is largely down to just working through them and just kind of diligent sensory work and, taking your time, and having the time to do it. Which right now, lockdown, great, plenty of time. Super. Okay, and then another question coming in here from Ian Helliwell, and I'll let you go for that one, Joe.
Yeah, sure. So that's an interesting one. So in terms of like the double barrel thing, it's from my experience, is really just a terminology thing. You could argue that the Moscatel cask that we've done would qualify as kind of double barreling. We kind of finished off bourbon matured spirit in a different cask type. So the Moscatel is the most recent release, if you're just watching. So that spirit has seen maturation in two cask types. Yeah, so kind of could qualify into that. If you're looking at a more kind of longer term kind of thing, so we do have some spirit that's been matured in bourbon and it's now sitting in a different cask type, and those casks are going to sit for quite a long time. So that again would qualify into that statement. It's a term that's pretty broad, so you could, double barrel could refer to something that's, like the Moscatel finish that we've done. And equally, it could refer to, maturation in two different casks and bringing them together, kind of like what we've done here. So I guess, yes, is the answer to that. But would we use the term double barrel on the label? Probably not. Well, it's certainly not on the cards at the moment.
Okay, great. So that's the end of the questions from this week for the moment. So if there's any more, if you could just pop them into the comment section before we start to wrap up, that would be super. Thank you very much. There's one question that came up last week that we missed it came up just as we were finishing the broadcast, so I missed it. So I will bring that up now, which is was asking about whether there's the thought of wine on the agenda. So this followed on from 30 minutes talking about the farm, the type of soil that we use, and why that meant that it felt like a natural progression for both beer and whiskey. I think the wine on the agenda is, well, this is something that we discuss regularly, but usually when we're about 3 bottles of wine down. And it's something that we've definitely thought about quite a lot. There's some lovely south-facing slopes here at the farm. But at the moment, it's not properly on the agenda, though. There are some fantastic English wines coming out of Yorkshire. A really good one from our local village called Kilham, which is called From Westow Vineyards, which I had a very nice bottle of sparkling wine by them the other day and thoroughly enjoyed it. Another question coming in. So are we planning on looking at quarter cask? Another one for you, Joe. All of these.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we haven't laid any down. The smallest cask size we've got laid down is the 200 litre bourbon. So we haven't gone down the kind of smaller cask route. But yeah, quarter casks, why not? Yeah, fairly certain we will at some stage look to fill some. There's a lot of really great whiskey matured in quarter casks, and never say never. Might see some rolling through the distillery shutters at some point, getting filled.
Okay, and I think if that's everything, I'll just do some usual plugs about signing up to the newsletter if you're not already, because it definitely is where you get you get to hear everything first that we're doing. So all our first releases come to you, any pre-orders and things like that. So if you are interested in that, then do sign up to our newsletter. Every month we send out a very newsy newsletter. You've just missed this month, I'm afraid, but next month will be coming. And you can find the links to that on our Facebook and on our website as well. Otherwise, Muscatel and Second Release are still very much on the website. And if you fancy a nice bottle of something over the bank holiday weekend, then do put your orders in. Although I've just said that, but I'm not sure if you ordered now whether it would get to you in time for the bank holiday, so don't hold me to that one. And I think, judging from comments and things like that, I think that's probably about everything. So that's bang on 30 minutes, or 30 minutes 30 seconds, Joe. So well done for our aim of a 30-minute broadcast.
Yeah. These are tasting good. Side by side. It's really interesting. It's really nice to revisit.
Yeah.
And taste them. Yeah, it's a good excuse to keep pouring them, Jenny. So look forward to the next one.
I'm talking to you tomorrow morning. So which one's your favourite? Actually, that's probably the best note to end on, isn't it?
You know what? It is the fork out of these two. Yeah. That is a crowd pleaser, and it's more up front. But this is just a little bit deeper, and it's just got a little bit more to kind of sink your teeth into, for want of a better phrase. It just kind of, more complexity, more depth.
Nice. And out of the full 4 of this first series, so 001, 002, 003, and 004, which is your favourite?
I think I always have the soft spot for number 2.
Okay.
Really, again, because it was, more with kind of, the view of the Filey Bay house style that we're aiming to get to, in terms of the lighter, much cleaner style. And that to me is probably the one to go to. Certainly on a day like today, given how warm it is.
Yeah.
It's very, very clean.
Lovely up here.
Yeah.
Great. On that note, I hope it's very lovely with wherever you are too. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. I don't think we're going anywhere for a while. So have a lovely week and a long weekend. Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye. So hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm good, Jenny. Thanks. Thank you.
Good. Down at the distillery there with a lovely looking setup and some nice evening light coming through.
Yeah, it's been a glorious day, but when we have days like this, we've got to start early because it's a little bit warm for the condensers. So it's been a bit of an early start for me this morning, yeah.
Yeah? What time did you start this morning?
Well, I have to admit it was 5:30.
Ooh.
So if I start to look a bit weary at the end of this, then you'll probably know why.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, we won't ask you too many questions, I don't think then. We'll just keep an eye out if you're just seeming to be relying on the whiskey a little bit too much.
I'll try not to.
Okay, great. So thanks to everyone who's joining so far. We're just going to chat a little bit whilst we wait for more people to join in, and then we'll get going good and proper. I hope you've been having a nice day and that you were able to have a sunny bank holiday weekend in kind of whatever guise your new normal currently looks like. So we've got a few more people joining. That's really nice now. And we've got a couple of comments coming in. Really nice. Oh, hi, Paul. Hopefully the video is started and that you're able to see us. I've got a little icon on my top of my screen saying that we've got a few more people joining. So that's really nice. So, so yeah, a few more seconds and then we'll get going.
That's not Paul Backhouse, is it?
It is Paul Backhouse.
Hello, Paul.
Brilliant. So yeah, so we've got people joining and lots of things happening. So to that end, we'll get started, I think. So welcome to Field to Bottle number 4. So every Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we do about half an hour or so talking about a different aspect of our field to bottle production process. We're sort of working in a semi-chronological order, but we're changing each week between the field and the actual hands-on process, and then the bottle, and talking about some of our releases and what we've been doing and actually what our whiskey tastes like. So this week we're on a field and a production week. So we're talking about malting and the wash, which are two of the bits that actually not that many people know about. It's the bit between the barley coming out of the field and being a grain to then running through the stills and becoming a whiskey good and proper. So it's a really crucial part, but it's not the most well known about. So it's a really nice one to be talking about today. So quick introductions to all of us here. So you've got David Thompson, sat on the right there at the distillery. He's our co-founder. Say hi.
Hi.
Super. And then you've got me. I'm Jenny Ashwood. I head up the marketing here at Spirit of Yorkshire. So today, Dave will be doing the majority of the talking, and I'll just be asking the questions, keeping an eye on anything that you guys are saying in the comments section, and generally just kind of keeping things moving and running. So first things first, David. Malt and barley isn't really a new thing for you, is it? It's not something that you just learned about when you started with the distillery. So talk a bit about your background. I'll turn my phone off too. That's embarrassing. And I'll talk a bit about your background and on why this isn't a new subject for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I suppose it started because I got my first ever job on a farm. So just left school, didn't really know what to do with myself. So I had a friend who was a farmer, and he gave me a job. I ended up there for 3 years, would you believe? Did everything from livestock right the way through to crops and everything you can imagine on a farm. And that sort of grew my interest really in agriculture. And I went off to agricultural college and did a marketing course, and specifically a merchanting course. And what that means basically is, how do we buy and sell to farmers? So I did that for 3 years. Luckily, I got a job with a company that was just trying to break new ground in the East Yorkshire area, which was my home anyway. So back in, I think it was 85, oh my gosh, a long time ago, I first got my company car and off I went. And I had to break, as I say, new ground with farmers, which, let's say, are not the easiest people to work with, especially if you're the new boy on the block. So that was hard work. But gradually, I built up a very successful career. And one of my major sort of crops, if you like, that I looked after and bought and sold was malting barley. So all those years ago, who would know? I'm now using that knowledge in the production of whiskey.
Yeah, and tell us about one of those particularly grumpy farmers that you used to work with.
Well, one of those particularly grumpy farmers was Tom Mellor. He was one of my very first customers, and I think it was probably 86, 87 when we started working with each other. And a little story here, Jen, which you've heard loads of times, but Tom, in his wisdom, said to me he was looking for a fly half to play for Bridlington, and if he wanted or if I wanted his fertilizer order, I would have to go and fill that place. And guess what I did? So we've been friends ever since. So a long, long time.
not too hard a deal to have to work with there, I think.
Oh, absolutely not. Tom was a good one of those good farmers at that time.
Okay. Okay, so nothing to do with rugby. So so let's move on a little bit onto malting. So what is malting? Why do we need to go through the malting process to make whiskey?
Okay, so obviously a few weeks ago you saw how Tom grew the malting barley, and my job was to buy that at the time, and basically we're looking for a crop that is suitable for malting, and there are certain elements of the crop we analyse in terms of its nitrogen content and things like this. Fundamentally, I won't go into too much detail or technical stuff, but the more nitrogen there is in the grain, there's a reduced amount of effectively fermentable sugars. So we're looking for low nitrogen barley. The area that we're in and the farm is on is perfect for that. So I would buy that and we would sell that on to a malting factory. Nowadays, obviously, we just send our own. So we send that down there, and effectively what the maltster does for us, he forces that grain into growing again effectively, and what that does, it releases fermentable sugars out of the grain, and that's part of the steeping process or the wetting of the barley process, and he then stops that process and starts to kiln it or dry it, and how long and what type of drying he uses will create different flavor profiles when we actually use that in beer or whiskey. So that's the basis of sending your barley off to being malted. It just releases those fermentable sugars for us to use in the next sort of process.
Okay, and so lots of distilleries at the moment talk about floor malting versus kind of normal malting. So what are the differences between those things?
Yeah, I mean, floor malting is very traditional. It's very hands-on, and effectively what you're doing is laying out that the barley onto a floor. It's around about a foot deep, and you have to manually move that with a rake as it starts to germinate. The malting factories we have around us are not now floor malted. They're into quite large production. But one thing that does give is consistency. So when we send our 200 tons of barley down to Muntons, who are our partner in this, we know we're going to get back a very uniform, well malted product to actually use in the whiskey and the beer.
So just a quick picture of what that looks like at the maltsters there. So that's a handful of grain. It's just, you can't quite see it probably on the screen, but it's just starting to germinate, and it's just starting to turn and get to the right kind of state that we need it for.
That's right.
So we've had our first question, which is it viable for Spirit of Yorkshire to do its own malting?
Viable. I think it would be nice to do, but it's an awful lot of work, and whether that actually adds anything to the end product is probably debatable. I mean, guys who are obviously floor malting would argue that it does. But at the end of the day, you know, what we're trying to do is produce something that is uniform. And I would suggest at this point in time, it'd be a lot of hard work, particularly when we've got a malting factory literally down the road from us. So at the moment, probably not, Paul, but great question.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, is that it would be a really nice part of our story is to be able to say that we do literally everything on site, like some of the Scottish distilleries do. I know Kilhoman up on Islay can do that too, but it's a really, so because of the brewery and the farm, we already had an exceptionally strong relationship with the local maltsters, Muntons, and so we can definitively say that what we send definitely comes back and is all our own barley. And actually, it's really nice when you go and look at it, and they've got kind of little things earmarked on their notice board, and it's a sort of Walpop/Hummerby Grange, and we can tell exactly what's coming back there, and it just means that we're working with experts who can do it exceptionally well. And I think that's a really important part of the process.
And I think people as well who do floor malt, distilleries do floor malt, probably don't produce 100% of their own malted barley. They'll have to buy some in as well. So it's a bit of a mix and match, but it's certainly nice to do a proportion of that if you could on the premises. Yeah,
the next stage for the expansion.
Maybe.
We'll see. I don't think we need that at the moment. So then where does peating come from? Because I think lots of people will know about peated whiskey, but actually malting is a crucial part that peated creation process?
Yeah, it's one of these myths that the peatedness of a whiskey comes from the water. It's actually nothing to do with the water at all. It's all to do with that malting process. So when I talked about the kilning or the drying of the malt in the latter stages of the production, what they do is they actually feed peat smoke into that process as part of the drying process, and it gives an element of phenols into the actual malt. You can actually then specify how peated your barley is when you source it. So if you're looking at some of the Islay whiskies, they're heavily peated. They've got a lot of parts per million of phenols, right down to just putting a small incorporation, if you like, into your normal production, which gives a lighter sort of element. So yeah, it's all to do with that kilning process at the end of the malting business. Yeah.
Okay, so then we've malted the whiskey. Oh, hang on, actually, I think maybe, is it just malting barley that can be malted, or are there other types of other things that can be malted?
Well, there's lots of things you can malt. In fact, and I'll give you a little bit of a heads up here, that we've actually taken a field of rye down to the malting factory as well, and that's been malted for us. So you can certainly malt other grains without question. You can also, not for us because we're a single malt producer, but other grain whiskies, you don't have to have the grains malted. So you can just put straight grains into the mash, but it's that would not be a single malt whiskey. That would be more of a blend or a grain whiskey. So you don't have to malt it, but it just adds flavor profiles, it adds more sugar, get more yield in terms of alcohol from it, and it's just more flavorsome if you do that process.
Okay, so then now you've malted it, what happens to it once it's been malted?
Okay, so in our business, that malt comes back to us in one big lump again. So out of, say, 100 tons, we actually get back a quarter less than that. So we're not actually getting a whole quantity back. So for every ton of barley we send down there, or a ton and a quarter we have to send down there to get a ton of malt back. So we do have an element of loss in that. So that comes back to us and it's stored at the brewery, and we pull from that stock, if you like, and the first process is basically grinding it up into a grist. At this point, I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but that's not ground at all. That's straight barley or malt, if you like, coming back from the maltsters. And what we do is we actually grind that into a grist. So this is more not like a flour, but like a coarse flour. If we produced a flour, that would actually start to block a lot of the production processes, and it would get stuck in the mash tun. So if you like, it's a coarse grind, and that depends how big the grain is to start with, how we set the actual rollers. But it's a very important process to get absolutely right to give us as much surface area to allow the water to start to draw those sugars out. So the first process really is grinding into a grist. We then put that into the mash tun, which is a big 1 ton mash tun, and we start the process of steeping. And all that is putting in hot water around about 65 degrees into the mash tun. And we do that for around about 20 minutes to let that water start to soak into the barley or the malt, and allows the enzymes to start to pull out those sugary short chain molecules that we need for fermentation, the next process.
Okay, and so lots of this, well, for us, this is when having a brewery on site is exceptionally useful, because this first part of the distillation process and the creation of whiskey is actually the same as the first part of the creation of beer. There's a couple of slight tweaks, but really you need the kind of the brewery equipment to do it. So that's part of the reason why the distillery was a really viable option and a really exciting prospect early on, is because we had the barley, we had the water supply, and actually we had the brewery all set up. So it was one less thing to have to invest in when creating this distillery.
Yeah, and I think, Jenny, it's probably good to say that that process is the hardest thing to get right. In terms of distilling, generally speaking, I think that's relatively straightforward, but a lot can go wrong with the mashing and the fermenting, which we'll go on to talk a bit more in depth about in a minute. But yeah, if you don't produce a good wash, which is the base product for distillation, you're never going to make a great whiskey. So that experience over the last 16 years has been absolutely vital to us getting to a point that we've got now with superb sort of whiskey coming out of the barrels.
There you go. So that's a hats off to Alex and the brewing team at Waldtop Brewery.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned, so we've talked about milling, we've talked about mashing, so we need to talk about fermentation now, fermenting, the next stage of that process.
Yeah, so when we start that process of drawing off what we call now the worts, it's very important that we have a clear wort. So we recirculate the wort to clarify it, if you like. The more sort of impurities we have in there, the more effect it has on flavour. So we're trying to make as clear a wort as possible. That will then come off and go into a washback, which is a large tank holding around about 10,000 litres. So that gets filled up, and this is when we pitch in the yeast. There's a lot of temperature involved as well, which I won't go into great detail about now, but we've got to monitor temperature all the way through this process. If we're too hot, it will kill yeast, it will kill the process. So we've got to actually monitor that very, very closely. And then we pitch in our yeast. We use two types of yeast. These drive different flavour profiles into the wash and then into the spirit. So again, the selection of the yeast strains you use are fundamental. Alex at the brewery would call them quite aggressive yeast strains. So they really want and are very hungry for that sugar, and they will make as much alcohol as they possibly can in a relatively short period of time. So typically 75 hours, you've got something attenuating up to an 8% wash. With beer production, that would probably take you, I don't know, 150 hours. It would take an awful lot longer because the yeast strains are not as aggressive. They're not sort of as hungry, if you like, for the sugar, but they're driving different flavors as well. So the choice of yeast strains and monitoring that process is vital to keep it giving us a head start down at the distillery. Okay,
and so then once we've got that, then that's the wash. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got a little bottle here. It doesn't probably look great on screen, but there you go. And it doesn't probably look like beer either. Obviously, it's not been filtered. It's just purely a solution of alcohol with loads of flavour in there, generated from the malting of the barley and the fermentation process and the yeast strains we use. So this is the base product we put into the stills. As I say, it's called wash, and it stands at around about 8% ABV. And if this isn't right, as I said earlier, we'll never make a great whiskey. So this is fundamental to the next process.
Great. So we've got the wash. Now it needs to start distilling. So how do we get it to the distillery?
Yeah, well, we've got a tanker which comes down on a Monday and a Thursday, and it brings 10,000 litres with it. So that 10,000 litres we split between distilling on a Monday and a Tuesday, and then a Thursday and a Friday. So at the moment we're distilling 4 days a week. Hopefully, as things move on, our plan is to extend that to 6 days a week. And we've got the capacity to do that. It's just a case really of making sure that we've got the wherewithal to do it. So we'll be moving along those lines in the next 6 to 9 months, I hope. So producing even more whiskey.